Hey folks, it's Cody Stoffer with Playmakers Corner, here to tell you about Code Red coaching. Competing in athletics means you've lifted the weights, you've watched film, and you've got the passion. Problem is, that's what everyone else in the state has done. Perfect your game by honing in on your mental performance with Code Red coaching. Whether you are a team or an individual, Code Red coaching has the tools to create mentally solid habits and set up you or your team for success. Find Code Red Coaching at coderedcoaching.com or call 720-979-1914 to learn more today. That's coderedcoaching.com or 720-979-1914 today. Now back to the show. Hello, loyal listeners. I am your host for this episode, Cody Stoffer, and this is the final episode of our awards series from the 2024 Colorado High School Tackle Football season here. We got some interesting candidates here up and down these lists, but let's talk about what makes these things even possible here. So, with that being said, we have votes from a panel of people here. We got Coach V, Gino V. Hill, myself, Gideon Egner, Phoenix Barons here, and Coach Woat, who is joining us, as well as you, the fans here. So we get 4 nominees for all of these categories here. We got Coach of the Year, we got Newcomer of the Year, we got Defensive Playmaker of the Year, we got Offensive Playmaker of the Year, and we got Most Valuable Playmaker. We vote for all of these here. And whoever has the majority is crowned the winner, with you, the fans, having the tiebreaker. Whether that's your candidate is voted and tied with somebody else for the first place spot, or whether that is your candidate as the second most percentage compared to the tied third most percentage. Whoever has the higher percent of votes gets the tiebreaker here. So that is how these awards work. And this is the final edition here. Be sure to check out our 1A through 4A awards. I'm also going to be talking about our all Playmaker teams that is voted exclusively by us here on the podcast here, with position limits that has a bit more exclusivity and, in my opinion, a bit more clout when it comes to comparing and stacking up to your peers. But with all of that being said here, it is going to be time to tune in to our very first category here. The very first category here is Coach of the Year here. So let's go ahead and meet the candidates here from the 5A classification. Our very first candidate is Dave Logan. He is a repeat offender here, 9-1 regular season record with a number 1 seed to boot, averaging 39 points per game and only allowing 13 points per game against opposing players, or teams, I mean. Some of the notable victories of the Cherry Creek season included a road win over Highland Park, 51-39, a team in Texas that had not lost a home game in years. So that was something that definitely helped put Colorado on the map, while then coming back and beating Pine Creek in a close one at home, and then winning their league that included wins over Arapahoe, Eagle Crest, Smoky Hill, and Grandview to that number 1 seed in the postseason. So that's Dave Logan's Cherry Creek Bruins. Our very next one is Jared Yanacito out of Ralston Valley. This is a team that I did a season preview for, and they definitely overachieved, in my opinion, through great contributions from many different guys who did not see a lot of snaps last year. They graduated a ton of seniors. I thought that this would be a little bit of a rebuilding year, but Yanacito and company proved otherwise, going 9-1 in their regular season, securing the number 3 seed, averaging 30 points per game and only allowing 16. Some notable wins included their 10-point shootout win over Erie to start the season, 48-38, their 10-9 win over Grandview in week 2, their win over Chatfield, 15-12, their overtime win over Columbine, 35-34, and then their wins over Denver East and Arvada West in back-to-back weeks to secure their spot in the playoffs and go undefeated in their league. And that is Yanacito's Ralston Valley Mustangs. Our next candidate here is Garrett Looney of Mountain Vista. This team went undefeated in the regular season, securing the number 2 seed with some interesting wins, such as their very first win in Hawaii, 83-6, followed up by beating playoff team Arapaho 35-0, Erie 55-12 on the road. They then came back and won their league for the first time since Valor has joined in a stunning 62-21 win over Valor with packed stands. They would then continue to roll through the rest of their regular season opponents en route to 10-0, 5-0 in the league, and the number 2 seed. That is Looney's Mountain Vista Golden Eagles. And our last candidate here recently upgraded from 4A state champs to 5A playoff attendee are the Erie Tigers here. They went 8-2 in the regular season, securing the number 9 seed in their first year in 5A, averaging 39 points per game and only allowing 17 points per game here. Notable wins included beating Brighton on the road 45-0 to start the season here, and then defeating Broomfield a few weeks later. They would then go on to win their league, beating Rangeview, Vista Peak Prep, Mullen, Legacy, and Horizon by massive scores here to secure that seeding and eventually see some luck in the postseason. But that is Jeff Geiger's Erie Tigers here. So a little bit of a rhyme scheme, but let's go ahead and turn our attention to the votes here for Coach of the Year from our panel as well as you, the fans. Our first vote comes from the fans. That's you here. Every single one of these coaches got over 20% of the votes. That included Garrett Looney at 20%, Jeff Geiger at 23%, Jared Yanacito at 25%, but sitting atop the mountain here with 32% of the vote was Coach Logan of Cherry Creek here with that 9-1 record, winning the fan vote, but giving us plenty of close calls here for who could come out on top. Our very next vote is going to be from Coach Woe, former coach of Dakota Ridge here, who's voting for Garrett Looney, saying, quote, Looney has absolutely transformed the Mountain Vista program. They are a dominant program on both sides of the ball, averaging 55 points a game and only giving up 7. Yes, the team is stacked with great players, but the coach has to take that talent and get them to play as one team and not individuals, and he has done that. When you beat Valor by 40, you get my vote, end quote. His runner-up being Yanacito. Moving along here, Phoenix here is going to cast a vote in another direction, voting for Jeff Geiger, saying, quote, I have a long history with Geiger that dates back to him winning state championships with Strasburg in 1A. Last year, I saw him win a state championship with Erie in 4A. He's now exceeding expectations and turning Erie into legit 5A contenders, with his biggest test of his coaching career soon to be against Cherry Creek in the quarterfinals of playoffs, end quote. This was written in by Phoenix a minute ago. But anyways, getting back to his quote, he says that, quote, he has taken Erie to heights that no one would have thought were possible. If you told someone at Erie 10 years ago that one day Erie would face Cherry Creek in the playoffs one day, they'd look at you like you were insane. Not if your program is led by Jeff Geiger, end quote. So now we have a vote for Logan, a vote for Looney, and a vote for Geiger here. And Gideon is going to keep switching things up, going with Yanacito, saying, quote, the only way to describe this team is ahead of schedule. Zeke Andrews is good, but I expected it to take a minute longer for the team as a whole to get back to where they were with Logan Madden and Tyrese Johnson. I was wrong. I will accept that and own it. Jared Yanacito coaches the players he has and adjusts to them. He does what needs to be done to succeed. He brought this team to a bye week and snapped Columbine's 20-plus game win streak. Even though it hurts me to vote for a Cowboy, Yanacito is one of the best football minds in the state. As long as he's a head coach, I will never be able to count Ralston Valley out until the buzzer sounds, end quote. So now we have a vote for every single candidate so far, and every single vote from here on out is going to have a huge influence on who is our 2024 5A Coach of the Year. And Gino here is going to try and mix things up here and give our name that we just heard for the first time a leg up here, voting for Yanacito, saying, quote, realistically, I don't think anyone in the state could have predicted that Ralston Valley would have an even better regular season than their Final Four team from last year. That's a testament to the amazing work that Coach Yanacito has put in there over there for the Mustangs. They lost so much talent from the year before that it made it hard to see much hope this season for them, but man, oh man, did the Mustangs play good this season, end quote. And we got Coach V here, who's going to vote for Garrett Looney here, putting this at a 2-2-1-1 tie, saying, quote, Coach Yano is a great coach, and I think his name will always be in consideration, but Coach Looney has developed a heck of a program that has become one of the elite in the last couple seasons. This year, their dominance cannot be denied. While coaching the boys' team to an undefeated record, he has also helped coach the girls' team to an undefeated one as well, including a state championship. The boys' team, at the time I'm typing this, is very much in contention for a title as well, but I'm more than confident to give my vote to Coach Looney for Coach of the Year regardless of the outcome, end quote. So, with all of that being said, Looney and Yanacito both have 2 votes here. Geiger has 1 vote, and Logan has 1 vote from you, the fans. So it comes down to where I land here, and there's a couple different ways this can pan out. If I give a vote to somebody who has 1 vote here, then we have to turn to the fan poll here to take us to the promised land as far as the tiebreaker for the 2 votes at a time. Or if I give a vote to Looney or Yanacito, that is going to call it wraps on this voting. And my vote is the final one to decide who your 2024 5A Coach of the Year winner is. And I am going to be selecting the man who proved my predictions wrong this year. Jared Yanacito is your 2024 5A Coach of the Year. And the main difference here is obviously huge shout out to Garrett Looney. I was strongly considering him, especially because I projected the Vista Golden Eagles to go either 9-1 or 10-0 this season if they could get over the Valor hump. And that is a huge milestone for this program, for his coaching career, and just for Colorado football in general, as well as being the coach who has guided the greatest quarterback in Colorado football history here. But I am just going to have to go with the team that way overachieved. I was in charge of the Ralston Valley preseason predictions here, and I thought that at best they could maybe go 5-5, and they went 8-2. They way overachieved. They beat some really hallmark programs here, despite losing a ton of talent. And for making me eat my own words, I got to give credit where credit is due, and that is to Coach Yanacito out of Ralston Valley. And now that opens the door for our very next category, which is Newcomer of the Year. This goes to the most outstanding freshman in a classification here. For regular season nominees here, we got Rome Bell out of Chatfield High School, 445 receiving yards, 4 receiving touchdowns, as well as 188 kickoff return yards. We also got Luke Rubley out of Regis Jesuit, 1,528 passing yards, 11 touchdowns, just 4 picks, and a rushing touchdown. We got Kevin Bunton III out of Westminster, 642 receiving yards, 8 receiving touchdowns, 186 rushing yards, and 4 rushing touchdowns to go with nearly 300 kickoff return yards. And Davis Moon, the starting offensive lineman out of the freshman class for Valor Christian High School. Now, to go a bit more in depth into all of these here, Davis Moon out of Valor Christian played a lot of snaps for them at guard, and this fella is quite the sight to see. You take a look at his film here, just because there's not a ton of stats, obviously, here. But he is somebody who, just in his freshman year, was starting for a very complex Valor Christian scheme here that involves a lot of pulling, a lot of double and peels kind of responsibilities from that guard position. And this Valor team made it all the way to the semifinals here with him as a part of their rotation, pass blocking, run blocking, doing whatever he needed to do, getting pancakes against the likes of a Mountain Vista squad, kicking out to tackle sometimes, pending the assignment and what all was needed here. And he did a great job. I would not say that he was left behind in the dust here against some of these notable teams here. And yeah, I'm very excited to see where his recruiting goes. Currently, as of now, as a freshman, he is 6'3", 285 pounds, and shout out to that 3.8 GPA that Davis Moon of Valor Christian is holding. Moving along to another candidate here is Luke Rubley here out of Regis Jesuit. Highly anticipated prospect here, seeing where he would go, and he ended up going to Regis Jesuit here, and he had some pretty great performances against the likes of Fossil Ridge, 22 of 32, 247 yards, 2 touchdowns to no interceptions in a win there. A couple of weeks later against Chaparral, threw for 230 yards and a touchdown. and then followed that up with two awesome performances against Fountain Fort Carson and Douglas County High School, going 11 of 20 in the first one for 145 yards, and then against Douglas County going 22 of 31 for 253 yards. That 253 would be a season high in the regular season, and over the course of those two games, throwing 6 touchdowns to just 2 interceptions here. He also notched a rushing touchdown in that Chaparral effort to kind of round him out in just his freshman year, getting the nod at quarterback and helping lead this Regis team to a pretty solid season. Moving along here, Kevin Bunton III out of Westminster, just an overall electric athlete here. He had obviously 186 rush yards and 4 rushing touchdowns. The majority of those, 2 of those, I should say, coming against Mountain Range in a win. He ran for 2 touchdowns on just 5 carries. He ran for a touchdown as well against Adams City, and he had his most rushing yards early in the season against Thornton. But receiving is his game here. And there was a pretty nice stretch here to start the season. In a close loss to Denver South, did catch a touchdown in a win over Thornton, 5 receptions for 80 yards and 2 scores, which is one of his better performances of the year. Against Rangeview, 5 receptions, 58 yards, and a touchdown. And then against Prairie View, this would be his, honestly, trademark performance of the season. In a 41-20 win, he notched a season-high 9 receptions for a season-high 145 yards and tied for a season-high 2 receiving touchdowns. He would then have a pretty solid game against Overland in a losing effort. However, he would have 8 receptions for 84 yards. And then against Lakewood, 5 receptions, 111 yards, which would be the only other time that he eclipsed the 100-yard max here. And then he'd have over 100 yards returning the football against Overland here for a 203-yard game, en route to a season total of 1,125 all-purpose yards for Kevin Bunton III out of Westminster. And finally here, Rome Bell out of Chatfield here, another receiver in what is turning out to be a receiver factory, would start off the season with a 112-yard performance against crosstown rival Dakota Ridge on just 4 receptions. A few weeks later, in a big win over Eagle Crest, he would notch 4 receptions for 83 yards and a receiving touchdown. In a very close 27-24 win over the likes of Douglas County High School, he would have 4 receptions for 34 yards and a touchdown. And then he would get a touchdown late in the season against Columbine here, while also getting a few opportunities to kick return. He had 658 all-purpose, or I should say total yards here, for the Chatfield Chargers. So let's go ahead and turn our attention to the votes here and see who all is getting the love here. So, with it being a close contest here, let's start off with Phoenix, who is going to cast the very first vote for Luke Rubley, saying, quote, Regis struggled at first with the freshman QB, but he started to dial in after the Cherry Creek game and started having some control on the field, and despite the downs they faced, he still finished the season with 1,500 yards passing and an 11-4 TD to INT ratio, along with a rushing touchdown. Not easy to be a newcomer in his shoes in the 5A scene, and his future will be very bright if Regis critically builds around him. End quote. So that is one vote for Regis's very own Luke Rubley. We're going to keep it up north and ask Gideon who he votes for, and his vote is going to be for Davis Moon out of Valor, saying, quote, starting as a freshman is already impressive on any team. Doing so on the offensive line, even more so. On Valor Christian, one of the most stacked lines in the state? Come on. When I first became aware of Davis Moon, it took me a minute to be cool with the idea, but in all reality, Moon is a large part of why this offensive line looks so good moving forward. I also want to shout out DJ Davenport and Angel Chavez real quick. Most years, at least one of y'all would have been Newcomer of the Year finalists. This year was extremely difficult, but I can say that it was not an easy decision. Regardless, with those two at Overland, the Trailblazers are still in better shape than they've been in a while, but my vote is for Davis Moon, end quote. So that's a 1-1 vote here. And yeah, I also want to shout out DJ Davenport and Angel Chavez as well. DJ, I went and saw that guy work out with Coach Q, the quarterback coach, and, saw him get some work in, and he looked really good there, and then it translated to the regular season, so their connection between Chavez and Davenport should really help out heading forward. So shout out to those guys, and looking forward to that as well. But that is a 1-1 tie between Davis Moon and Luke Rubley. Bouncing around here, we're going to actually go to Gino next, who is voting for Davis Moon, saying, quote, Valor has themselves another potential huge piece to build on with Davis Moon. Moon started as a freshman despite Valor having one of the deepest offensive lines in the state. he will be a name you'll be hearing a lot for the next few years, end quote. So now Davis Moon pulls ahead 2-1. Keeping things interesting, however, is Coach Woat here, who's voting for Luke Rubley, saying, quote, over 1,500 passing and helped the Regis program turn around a terrible start to their season, and now as a team that people are looking at as a possible sleeper in the 5A ranks, Rubley is a name to watch out for moving forward, end quote. So now we are tied at 2-2 here. I am going to butt in here, and I'm going to vote for Davis Moon. Watching his film, I was thoroughly impressed. He was able to accomplish a lot of things. He's got great size as just a freshman, and he's somebody who I think versatility-wise can offer a lot of upside for the Eagles this year, and somebody who I think, obviously getting snaps as a freshman is a huge deal, and he has a chance to really carve out his name as probably one of the best offensive line prospects in Colorado over these next few years. So my vote is for Davis Moon, giving him a 3-2 lead. However, when you look at the Twitter poll, you, the fans here, also thought it came down to Davis Moon versus Luke Rubley here. Kevin Bunton III and Roe Bell here both got a combined 25% of the vote, but Moon and Rubley both got over 30% on 946 votes, making that one of our most popular polls in recent memory. So thank you all for voting on that. But ultimately, you, the fans, by just a margin of 3%, chose Luke Rubley out of Regis Jesuit to be your 2024 4A or 5A newcomer of the year. Sorry, that 2024 threw me off a little bit, but the fan newcomer of the year does go to Luke Rubley and does tie up the vote at 3-3 with the tiebreaker in hand here. So it all comes down to Coach V. If he votes for one of the other nominees, it is going to be Luke Rubley. If he votes for Rubley, it's definitely Rubley. And if he votes for Moon, it's going to be Moon. So with that in mind, Coach V is going to go with Davis Moon as your 2024 5A newcomer of the year. Coach V here has a lot to say, saying, quote, he's a great offensive lineman for a Valor squad that already has a host of next-level starters. This isn't the first nor last time a Valor offensive lineman started as a freshman, but the last one was poached away by IMG Academy. I like Rubley from Regis's game, but gotta go with the next great Valor lineman in Moon. End quote. So even for Coach V here, it was kind of tough. Rubley was right there in those ranks here. And as Gideon alluded to, this is one of the most talented freshman groups that we have seen in one classification, much less across multiple classifications. We're very excited for this class of 2028, but Davis Moon is your 2024 5A newcomer of the year. Now, we got ourselves quite the exciting nominations here and really just overall vote race. This is one of the closest I've ever seen, and that is for the 5A Defensive Playmaker of the Year. Now, for Defensive Playmaker of the Year, we have some awesome nominees here from everywhere. We got DJ Crow out of Denver East High School, had himself just an incredible season, 82 tackles, 24 tackles for loss, 10.5 sacks, 25 hurries, 4 forced fumbles, and a pass deflection. Some notable performances include the first, 2 weeks of the season, 7 tackles for loss, 18 total tackles in wins over Sand Creek and Vista Peak Prep. A couple weeks later against Eagle Crest, despite it being a losing effort, 10 total tackles, 6 solo, and 3 for loss there. Against Montbello, 3 tackles for loss as well. And then saving some of his best for last here. In the last game of the season against Denver South, 12 total tackles and 4 for loss. When we turn our attention towards his pass rushing performances, 4.5 sacks across those first 2 games and 9 total hurries. In that loss to Eagle Crest, still registered 2 sacks and 3 hurries in that game. Against Chatfield in a win, 2 sacks for 30 yards of loss as well as 6 hurries, providing constant pressure all night long en route to an upset win, and also got a pass deflection in that game and a forced fumble. So DJ Crow out of Denver East, somebody who's been on our list for a minute here, gets the nod for a Defensive Playmaker of the Year nomination. Another guy who's been on our list for a while and came back after a tough injury last season that ended his season and that is Carter Daniels out of Mountain Vista High School. 129 tackles, 23 for loss, 5 sacks, 7 hurries, a pick for a pick 6. That was against Fruita Monument, as well as 2 forced fumbles and 2 fumble recoveries and 2 pass deflections. Made significant strides in his pass defense. Like I said, Fruita Monument had that pick 6. But, against Rappo had a pass deflection, Thunder Ridge had a pass deflection, and just overall kept stride for stride with some people. Had a fumble recovery in that Valor Christian game, as well as forced a fumble there. So make sure to double back to that recap, which went hyphy. As far as his pass rushing goes, had 2 sacks against Valor in that Valor Christian game, as well as a hurry, but opened up the season with 2 sacks in ensuing weeks. And then as far as tackle totals go, had 4 tackles for loss in that season opener in Hawaii, had 3 the following week against Arapahoe High School, had another awesome 4-week stretch against Cherokee Trail High School, Overland, Valor Christian, and Thunder Ridge, where he had over 2 tackles for loss in all of those games, totaling for 9 tackles for loss, as well as getting his total tackle numbers over 40 tackles in those 4 games. And then in that Fruita Monument game, had 25 tackles, 11 solo, 14 assisted. I want to say he was in running for defensive or just playmaker of the week in general, and had double-digit tackles to close the season against Rock Canyon and Castleview as well. And that Castleview game in a 49-7 win also had 3.5 tackles for loss in that game. So an incredible season, especially considering his injury last season. Carter Daniels at that linebacker spot, absolutely critical to this Mountain Vista defense this year en route to their undefeated regular season. Caden Absher is our next guy here. He had himself quite the season. 130 tackles, 14 of those for loss, 4 sacks, 8 hurries, a pick, and 2 pass deflections. When you look at his tackle numbers here, he had an incredible week 1 against Brighton in a 3-0 win, had 17 total tackles, 10 solo, and 2 for loss in that game. Only a couple weeks later against Rock Canyon, 14 total tackles, and 2 of those being for loss. Now, despite these being losing efforts against Castleview and Chatfield, still posted a combined 32 tackles across those 2 games. And then in a win against Found Fort Carson, 12 tackles, 8 solo, and 2 for loss in those efforts here. And then, followed that up with some more double-digit performances against Pine Creek and Regis with 3 tackles for loss combined over those games. And then in a win over Chaparral, 2 tackles for loss. As far as his pass rushing goes, 2 sacks against Smoky Hill for 21 yards lost, a sack against Rock Canyon, also in a win, and a sack against Chatfield in a close loss. And then his pick came against Castleview with his pass deflections coming against Brighton and Legend. So that is Caden Absher's highlight performances as the middle linebacker for this Douglas County squad. Only a year after graduating one of the top linebackers in the state, they get an incredible performance from Absher this season. And finally, our final Defensive Playmaker of the Year candidacy goes to T.I. Umu Kais here out of Cherry Creek High School here. He is their nose guard here and put up some pretty impressive stats for a nose tackle here. 52 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, as well as a punt block. As somebody who consistently gets double or triple teamed, he draws a ton of attention for his linebackers to be able to fill in and make plays. He registered sacks against the likes of Highlands Park and Eagle Crest in those wins. And then as far as other performances this season, had 9 tackles in their opening game, 7 tackles in their follow-up game here. Both of those games were out of state. He also had 7 tackles against Pine Creek, 7 tackles against Rappo and Eagle Crest with a tackle for loss in each of those games, and closed the season with a 4-tackle, 1 TFL performance against Grandview. So that is T.I. out of Cherry Creek with a huge impact here. Now let's go ahead and turn to our votes here. This one is going to be electric as we are all pretty split with different ideologies across all of our pollsters. I'm going to start off with myself here. I'm going to vote for DJ Crow out of Denver East. I just think that without him, this East team really struggles this season and especially doesn't earn a home playoff game, I don't think. I think that his contributions to this team cannot be overstated. This is his second year in a row bringing in this kind of gravity from the pass rush position and is somebody who I'm just very excited to see what he does and what his opportunities look like on the next level. And DJ Crow out of the East Angels program is my vote for Defensive Playmaker of the Year. Keeping it with the OGs here, Coach V is going to vote, and he's going to cast his vote for Carter Daniels here, saying, quote, I went back and forth between him and T.I., but I believe this performance coming off an ACL tear is special. He has led a Mountain Vista defense that has seen its best year since we've started this podcast, and I will never forget that performance versus Valor. Specifically, the play from Carter where he read the play correctly and hammered the ball carrier behind the line. This would halt all of Valor's momentum on offense and lead to one of the great wins we've ever seen in Colorado high school football history, end quote. So the OGs are split here, and now we're going to send it up north to our CSU guys and see where they land here. Gideon here is going to pull this vote in other direction here, voting for Caden Absher, saying, quote, what makes a defensive player of the year? Flashy stats, high-profile performances, impact on team. No matter what you say, Caden Absher has it. My second place, Carter Daniels, has it as well, and I would like to commend Carter on an amazing season. However, what is Douglas County's defense without Absher? I contend that without Absher, Douglas County would not have made the playoffs. I don't care if they were bounced in the first round. Absher made that defense a solid defense. Without him, it's Swiss cheese. That's why he's my depoy, end quote. Now, our other CSU guy, Phoenix here, is going to vote for DJ Crow, saying, quote, Denver East has an absolute beast on that D-line, and he showed them why this season, having double-digit sacks and 24 TFLs this season. No denying the talent this young man has, and he is definitely one of the top D-linemen in 5A football today, end quote. Now, keeping it with the pod here, we're going to cut to Gino, and as it currently stands, that means that Absher has a vote, DJ Crow is currently leading with 2 votes, and Carter Daniels also has a vote here. But Gino is going to cause a tie here at the top, voting for Caden Absher, saying, quote, I'm not sure there's a single linebacker I've seen this year that plays as hard as Absher. He simply gets tackles in any way he sees fit and is very solid in coverage as well. I doubt we would have been hearing anything about Douglas County this year if it wasn't for the elite work that Absher puts in at MLB for the Huskies, end quote. Now to go to Coach Woe. It is now a 2-way tie between Crow and Absher, and Woe is going to make it a 3-way tie here, voting for Carter Daniels, saying, quote, Carter Daniels was the most impressive defensive player I had the chance to watch this year. Just an absolute disruptor on defense and always around the football. This all coming off ACL surgery last year and was just a dominant player, leading the Mountain Vista defense to allowing only 7 points per game against, end quote. So now we have a 3-way tie at 2 votes apiece between DJ Crow, Carter Daniels, and Caden Absher. And we're going to go to you, the fans, but your number 1 selection is not going to tell us who is the winner here. Because you, the fans, with 29% of the vote on 863 votes, nominated T.I. Umukais as the defensive playmaker of the year here. Like I said, 29% of the vote. All of your nominations got 20%. But that means it's a 2-2-1 to 1 tie here. And you, the fans, have the tiebreaker with these percentages. So whoever has the highest percentage out of DJ Crow, Carter Daniels, and Caden Absher, thanks to you, the fans, is going to be our 5A 2024 Defensive Playmaker of the Year. So when you, the fans, looked at these stats, these 82 tackles, 24 for loss from DJ Crow, 10.5 sacks, as well as 25 hurries. You looked at Carter Daniels, 129 tackles, 23 for loss, 5 sacks, 7 hurries, and a pick. And you looked at Caden Absher's 130 tackles, 14 for loss, 4 sacks, pick, and 2 pass deflections. You all were very, very close. As the person who had the least amount of votes compared to the most amount of votes out of all 4 candidates was only a 9% difference. But then once you narrow it down to the 3 who are in contention for Defensive Playmaker of the Year, it is only a 6% difference, and between 1 and 2, it is a 1% difference here. Coming in with the least amount of fan votes, and unfortunately not your Defensive Playmaker of the Year, is DJ Crow with 20% of the vote, just barely falling outside here of this tiebreaker. And that means that our tiebreaker is between 2 middle linebackers in the Douglas County area, Carter Daniels, Caden Absher. Who's it going to be according to you, the fans, who have the tiebreaker and decided by only a single percent? It was Carter Daniels here out of Mountain Vista here with 26% of the vote, barely edging out Caden Absher with 25% of the vote here. Like I said, y'all's selection, y'all's vote was T.I., but y'all have the tiebreaker when it comes to these percentages here, so every vote matters. And the 1% of votes are going to matter all the way as Carter Daniels wins the tiebreaker and wins our 5A 2024 Defensive Playmaker of the Year. I want to give a shout out to Carter, who's somebody who we have been, watching since his freshman year, and he's been making an impact. That ACL tear was some of the worst news I've probably heard in my time of the podcast as far as in-season things that happened. But Carter did not let that define him. He stuck to it, put in the work, and not only did he help lead this Mountain Vista team to a 10-0 season, but he's going to get recognized here as the Defensive Playmaker of the Year for Playmakers Corner of the 2024 5A season. Congratulations to Carter here. We're very excited to see where your career goes on top of this huge dub. Our next award pool is for the Offensive Playmaker of the Year for the 2024 season here in 5A. And once again, we have some pretty absurd nominations here. We got, keeping it rolling on the Mountain Vista train, Jack Blaze out of Mountain Vista High School, 770 rushing yards and 548 receiving yards, putting his net over 1,300 yards and 22 total touchdowns, 12 rushing, 10 receiving, being at least statistically the best dual threat in the entire state of Colorado. He had some very notable performances against a handful of teams, but you have to look at this Valor Christian game where he put up a pretty impressive win. Well, impressive considering this was the first win for Mountain Vista in school history against Valor, but he ran for 107 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns, not to mention catching for 100 yards on just 3 receptions and a touchdown in just a knockdown performance here. You look at some of his other games, he had 80 receiving yards against Pearl City. He had a season-high 5 receptions for 66 yards against Castleview, and he also had 4 receiving touchdowns over the course of the Erie and Cherokee Trail games. As far as rushing goes, he averaged an absurd 8.8 yards per carry on the season here, running for 82 against Pearl City and 2 touchdowns, running for 74 against Arapahoe in one of his slower games on 13 carries for a touchdown, but bounced back with 82 yards over Erie, over 10 yards per carry. Against Valor Christian, 10.7 yards per carry and 2 rushing touchdowns. Fruita Monument, almost 100 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. Rock Canyon, an absurd 18 yards per carry on just 6 carries, going for 108 yards and a score, and then posted a season-high 3 rushing touchdowns against Castleview to go with 163 rushing yards. That is the story of Jack Blaze out of Mountain Vista High School. Turning our attention here, we got Jeremiah Hoffman out of Cherry Creek, the senior wide receiver, 709 receiving yards, 6 receiving touchdowns, as well as a rushing touchdown on a 40-yard rushing attempt against Highlands Park. That was easily his best rushing attempt game, as it's his only carry of the season. But against them through the air, he also had 4 receptions for 89 yards and a receiving touchdown against one of the best teams in the country. In a loss to Skyridge on the road, Maya was kind of the only answer they had on offense. 6 receptions, 202 yards, and a receiving touchdown, both being season bests, at least in yards, and tied for in touchdowns. He would have a great performance against Regis Jesuit and one of the best highlights of the year. 7 receptions for 79 yards and an absolute crazy head top. 7 receptions would be his high on the season for receptions in a game. He'd also post a 53-yard, 1-touchdown performance against Cherokee Trail, as well as a 59-yard, 1-touchdown performance against Grandview and another touchdown against Eagle Crest in those games. That is Jeremiah Hoffman, one of the top-rated wide receivers that we've seen in our time here at the pod. We're going to jump all the way up north for our next 2 candidates, however, and we got Nick Kubat here out of Fossil Ridge High School, 2,439 passing yards, 31 touchdowns to just 6 interceptions to go with 360 rushing yards and 4 rushing touchdowns. In some notable games this season, Kubat, younger brother, and keeping the Kubat name rolling here in Fort Collins, had some pretty impressive showings here, such as his game against Loveland to start the season, 23 of 38 for 276 yards, 2 touchdowns to 1 pick. In a loss to Rock Canyon here, still had a pretty good game, 20 of 28, 193 yards, and 4 touchdowns to just 1 pick. In a loss to Columbine, still 20 of 30, 169, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. But he helped this team shrug off a 1-3 start to then win 4 games in a row. Over the course of these next games, he never passed for less than 240 yards and topped out against Fort Collins in a win with 351 yards and 3 touchdowns. these games, he also threw for 14 touchdowns to just one interception. And then in the league title game, had still a decent game, throwing for 332 yards on 36 pass attempts in a close loss to Fairview here. And then as far as rushing goes, had his best performance against Fort Collins, 3 rushing touchdowns on top of his 3 passing touchdowns for a 6-touchdown performance in a rivalry win for Nick Kubat of Fossil Ridge. Now, keeping it in Fort Collins on the losing side of that game, but on the winning side of a ton of performances, was Levi Hermson, who had over 2,000 all-purpose yards this season here with great performances across the board, but as a receiving threat and as a kick returner. As a receiver here, he had some great games like Pooter, 6 receptions, 123 yards, and 2 scores. In a loss to Erie, 12 receptions, which was tied for a season high that he would replicate 2 more times against Fairview and Rocky Mountain. In those 12 reception games, caught for 126, 148, and 147, respectively. So just crazy reception numbers. In that loss to Fossil Ridge, still notched 11 receptions for 110 yards. And, he had a really good game against Brighton, going for a season-high 3 receiving touchdowns on 7 receptions for 162 yards. When we look at his kickoff returning stats, however, you're really going to find a hard time to argue against this here, as he had over 900 return yards over the course of the season here, with notable games like Eagle Crest, 145 return yards on just 4 kickoff returns, 240 against Horizon, and 198 against Fairview here. Just being absolutely dynamic in that part of the game. He returned a punt against North Glen. He returned a kickoff against Horizon. So he found every single possible way to score between offense and special teams to notch an incredibly special season for himself and the Lambkins. Now, for this vote, we're going to start off with Coach Wout here, who is selecting Nick Kubat, saying, quote, Kubat was a complete offensive player for Fossil Ridge. His leadership and stats have helped them advance to the next round of the playoffs, and he had over 400 yards passing in the first playoff game. He's been consistent all season and the true leader and playmaker for Fossil Ridge, end quote. Now, you on the fan side did not really see that, as the Fort Collins side of fans did not show up to vote. Those 2 Fort Collins players only getting 12% of the vote combined, and falling short of Jeremiah Hoffman at 25%, but at a whopping 63% on 916 votes was Jack Blaze out of Mountain Vista here. 63% of the vote, like I said, and your 5A Offensive Playmaker of the Year, according to the fans here. Now, the fans and Coach V are seeing eye to eye just this once, as Simon himself is voting for Jack Blaze, saying, quote, I have been one of the few Blaze believers, and I will stand on this. Although having the greatest quarterback in Colorado football history helps a lot, Blaze has had an excellent season as well. This Mountain Vista offense is dangerous because he makes teams pay when they don't pay enough attention to him as well. Against Valor, he not only ran for 100, but caught for 100 as well. I'll probably get outvoted here, but he deserves his flowers, end quote. And so with Coach V, that's actually a 2-1 lead here that Jack Blaze has. Now, myself, I'm going to vote for Levi Hermson. I don't think that this Fort Collins team gets nearly as far as they do without his efforts on both special teams and offense. To find a player to go for over 2,000 scrimmage yards is pretty absurd, honestly. And Levi is somebody who had crazy stats throughout the season. Now, while he did take care of business against inferior opponents, he had some of his better moments and performances against some of the better teams that this Fort Collins team played. And I really just truly don't think that without his 14 touchdowns on the season, this team is nearly in the same spot as they are in heading into the playoffs and just being a team that was kind of in the mix this year. So that is a 1-1-2 vote, but Gino is going to even it out here with a Nick Kubat vote, saying, quote, being at the helm of a pass-heavy offense is consistently a tough task, but Kubat has made that look easy as he lit up for a very solid Fossil Ridge squad. 31 TDs on the season with very efficient numbers, with not exactly the best, has me going with Kubat here for Opoy, end quote. So Gino loves the numbers here for Kubat. Gideon here is going to agree with me here and vote for Levi Hermson, saying, quote, I know that this pick will be controversial, but Hermson is one of the top yard getters in the state. Leading 5A in receiving yards is enough to have you in consideration, but the kickoff return yards is what does it for me. Hermson is first nationally in KOR yards on average and second in total. I saw this man 3 times in one half get a minimum of 70 yards on individual returns. Hermson puts Fort Collins in an incredible field position that they leverage into shootouts with some of the top teams in the state. Hermson is not only the engine of this offense, he decides where the starting line is. End quote. So now we got 2 votes for Blaze, including the tiebreaker, 2 votes for Levi Hermson, and 2 votes for Nick Kubat here. So, with all of that being considered, Phoenix is going to have the final say on who your 2024 5A new offensive playmaker of the year is going to be, and he is going to keep it in his backyard, selecting Nick Kubat here, saying, quote, he is the complete offensive package and is truly one of the top QBs in 5A. 2,400 passing yards, but what's been more impressive is his 31 passing touchdowns. That is incredibly difficult to do, and Kubat makes it look easy. Along with his 4 rushing touchdowns and 360 yards on the ground, he is undeniably the true example of what it means to be an offensive playmaker, end quote. So with Phoenix's vote, Nick Kubat pulls ahead with a 3-vote lead, beating out Hermson and Blaze, who both had 2 votes apiece here. Congratulations to Nick Kubat, your 5A 2024 Offensive Playmaker of the Year out of Fossil Ridge High School. Coming up next, we have a short ad break, but then we will be back with our playmakers who made the All-PMC team with position limits that we will discuss, and then following that, our most valuable playmaker. All up next on Playmakers Corner. Obviously, you want a trainer who can make you stronger and faster with the work you put in, but what about a trainer who can help you rehab and recover like the pros? Look no further than Junkyard Training, that not only offers specific strength and speed training, but also offers a plethora of recovery and rehab techniques like cryo, cupping, recovery boots, and so much more. Learn more today by visiting junkyardtraining.net or call 303-521-7594. Once again, visit junkyardtraining.net or call 303-521-7594 and get started today. And we are back to discuss our All-PMC team. As a reminder, the thing that makes All Playmakers Corner the team exclusive and noteworthy is that there are limited positions here. We only take 2 quarterbacks. We only take 2 running backs. We take 1 athlete, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 2 tackles, 3 interior offensive linemen, but it just kind of morphs into 5 offensive linemen with the versatility. 2 defensive tackles, 2 edge rushers, 2 linebackers, 3 corners, 2 safeties, 2 kickers, and a punter. That's it. That's all that we take. And, it gets pretty cutthroat for us when we have to make a decision on this guy over this guy for this position. But I much, much, much prefer it over our all-state teams that are an absolute joke, where you can have 5 quarterbacks on the first team just because they receive a certain amount of votes compared to 1 running back. That doesn't make any sense. That's not how a team is built. That's not how a football team is built. And so that's not how we're going to build our all-PMC teams, period. So, without further ado, we can start off on the special team side of things, where Alexander Britt out of Mountain Range and Jake Mainthy out of Regis Jesuit are making our kicker spots on All-PMC. Our 1 punter spot is going to go to Mason Crosby, no, not the Green Bay Packer legend, but the punter of Chaparral. Now, if we turn our attention to the offensive side of the ball, actually, let's turn our attention to the trenches here. So we're going to go a little back and forth and switch it up a little bit. For our offensive line for the 5A 2024 All-PMC team, we're going to include Cannon Smith out of Valor Christian. We're going to include Jack Heath out of Mountain Vista. We're going to include J.J. Matthews out of Denver East. We're going to include Gage Turnbull out of Legend High School. And we're going to include Ned Zelinskis out of Cherry Creek. There are a lot of names that did not make this, but these are a lot of solid guys for the offensive line here that do represent. Now, for defensive tackle and edge, we only take 2 of those apiece. So our defensive tackles are going to include Depoy nominee T.I. Umukais here out of Cherry Creek and Christian Nightwalker out of Arvada West. For our edge players, we are going to take Adrian Lee out of Chaparral and DJ Crow out of Denver East for our edge players. Now, going to the receiving threats here and those who are trying to snuff them out, at tight end, we're going to go with Ronnie Rollman out of Chatfield High School as our tight end for 5A. And then at safety here, we are going to go with our two safeties being Dion Giles-Ray out of Denver East and Aiden Kanapke out of Cherry Creek here. Stay tuned for our top 5 position lists where we break down all of these guys' film to the absolute minimal point and build them back up. It's worth listening to those, but those are our safeties for all PMC this season. At wide receiver here, we're going to go with Marcus Mosier out of Fossil Ridge, Jeremiah Hoffman out of Cherry Creek, and Levi Hermson out of Fort Collins. At cornerback for our spots, we're going to go with Devin Zalbeski out of Westminster, Bryce Bailey out of Mountain Vista, and Tyson Watson out of Arapahoe High School. Now, let's go ahead and move to our running backs and our linebackers here. Our running backs are going to be James Basinger out of Columbine High School and Jaden Fox out of Cherry Creek High School. And in response, our two linebackers are going to be our DPOY nominees, Carter Daniels out of Mountain Vista and Caden Absher out of Douglas County. Be sure to double back to those segments if you did not do so already. That only leaves 3 players left for quarterback and for athlete. Our athlete for 2024 All-PMC is going to be, once again, Jordan Rochelle here. He's basically had a monopoly on this position, but has increased his defensive workload here, as well as rushing and receiving en route to another athlete position. And then our 2 quarterbacks are going to be Nick Kubat, who won our Offensive Playmaker of the Year, and Austin Madreski out of Mountain Vista. So, once again, to go over it, our 2 quarterbacks with only 2 spots are Austin Madreski out of Mountain Vista and Nick Kubat out of Fossil Ridge. Our running backs, which there are only 2, is James Basinger out of Columbine and Jaden Fox out of Cherry Creek. Our wide receivers, of which there are only 3, are Marcus Mosier out of Fossil Ridge, Jeremiah Hoffman out of Cherry Creek, and Levi Hermson out of Fort Collins. Our tight end is Ronnie Rollman out of Chatfield. Our offensive line is Cannon Smith out of Valor, Jack Heath out of Mountain Vista, JJ Matthews out of Denver East, Gage Turnbull out of Legend, and Ned Zelinskis out of Cherry Creek. Our defensive tackles, of which there are only 2, is T.I. Umokais out of Cherry Creek and Christian Nightwalker out of Arvada West. Our edge players are Adrian Lee out of Chaparral and DJ Crow out of Denver East. Our linebackers are Carter Daniels out of Mountain Vista and Caden Absher out of Douglas County. Our cornerbacks are Devin Salbeski out of Westminster, Bryce Bailey out of Mountain Vista, and Tyson Watson out of Arapahoe for our 3 there. Our 2 safeties are Aiden Kanapke out of Cherry Creek and Dion Giles-Ray out of Denver East. Our kickers are Alexander Britt out of Mountain Range and Jack Mainthy out of Regis Jesuit, and our punter is Mason Crosby out of Chaparral. And finally, our athlete for the 2024 5A All-PMC team is Jordan Rochelle out of Fairview. That'll do it for our All-Playmaker team for the 5A classification of 2024. And finally, we come to our most valuable playmaker category here. This one I've been looking forward to, and we got some good ones this year. Our first nomination is Austin Madreski out of Mountain Vista High School here, leading the Golden Eagles to a perfect 10-0 regular season record. And I mean, it would be easier to pick out the performances that were not iconic here. I mean, 6 touchdowns in the opening game of the season, 8 touchdowns passing against Erie on 20 of 22, 366 yards, no interceptions. Just a couple weeks later against Overland, only had 8 attempts and still threw 4 passing touchdowns. Valor Christian, almost perfect, 22 of 25, 425 passing yards and 5 passing touchdowns. 6 passing touchdowns, no picks against Thunder Ridge in the following week with 367 passing yards. And then against Rock Canyon a few weeks later, 297 passing yards and 7 passing touchdowns to no picks. On the season, 2,936 passing yards, 50 passing touchdowns to just 5 interceptions, as well as 134 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns and a receiving touchdown against Rock Canyon. I want to say that was a pass from Jack Blaze. So that is just a tidbit on the historic season that Austin Madreski had. Our next MVP candidate here is James Basinger out of Columbine, somebody who we've been able to keep an eye out for since heading in his freshman season here. He had a phenomenal year rushing for 1,569 rushing yards, 23 rushing touchdowns, while also catching 2 receiving touchdowns, a rarity in that system. And then defensively, maybe not as many snaps as some of us were hoping for, but still posted 29 tackles, a TFL, 2 picks with 95 interception return yards, a forced fumble, and 2 pass deflections here. That pick 6 coming against Denver South. Speaking of some of his defensive performances here, he had a 9-tackle performance in a 16-14 win against Legend High School that included his TFL and 7 solo tackles, his best performance in the season in their closest win. He also had 5 tackles against Ralston Valley, and then his interceptions came against Thunder Ridge and Denver South here, with pass deflections in that Thunder Ridge and Heritage game and a forced fumble against Legend. Offensively, however, like I said, ran for 1,569 yards, including a 300-yard performance against Heritage High School and 4 rushing touchdowns. That would be tied for his season high outside of the Denver South game, where he also had 4 rushing touchdowns. That is James Basinger out of Columbine. Moving along here, keeping it in the Jeffco conference, though, we have Zeke Andrews here, 2,046 passing yards, 18 touchdowns to no recorded interceptions, and 572 rushing yards and 4 rushing touchdowns. His performances were integral to this season where this squad overachieved, including an opening performance, 15 of 25, 320 passing yards, and 3 touchdowns to no picks against Erie High School, 60% completion in that game. He would then go 20 of 30 for 135 yards and a passing touchdown against Grandview, throw for 303 yards against Mullen, throw for 233 against Thunder Ridge in their undefeated start. He would still throw for 258 yards in a loss to Valor Christian. A couple weeks later, he would have his highest touchdown passing performance of the season against Denver South, 16 of 17 for 201 yards and 5 touchdowns to no interceptions. Just incredibly efficient work for him up and down this season. Some nice rushing totals as well. Like I said, 572 rushing yards. He had 2 rushing touchdowns in that 15-12 win over Chatfield, 77 yards on 11 carries. In that close loss to Valor, also ran for 80 yards. His season high would come against Columbine with 82 rushing yards on just 12 carries. Or Psych Allied, 85 rushing yards the very next week against Denver East and a rushing touchdown in that big win. Zeke Andrews being the face of this Ralston Valley team that kept the ship chugging. And finally, our final MVP candidate here is none other than Jordan Rochelle, just a dual threat guy, but also really ramping up that defensive production, 731 rushing yards and 666 receiving yards for over 1,300 total yards, nearly 1,400, but 16 rushing touchdowns and 5 receiving touchdowns made for 21 total touchdowns on the offensive side of the ball. And then defensively, 54 tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 3 picks, 9 pass deflections, and a punt block made him a threat in every single aspect of the ball. We're going to start off with his offensive performances here, where he had 3 consecutive games of hat trick rushing performances here. Fort Collins, 93 yards, 3 rushing touchdowns on 7 carries. Brighton, 11 carries, 102 yards, and 3 rushing touchdowns. And then Fossil Ridge, his highest volume as a rusher, 27 carries, 126 yards, and 3 rushing touchdowns. All 3 of those in wins because Fairview was undefeated in the regular season. Some of his notable receiving performances include the likes of Monarch, 5 receptions, 110 yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns. Prairie View, he also had 2 receiving touchdowns, but Fort Collins would be where he shined the brightest, 7 receptions, 119 yards, and a receiving touchdown in that game. He would have 137 receiving yards on 7 receptions against Rocky Mountain just a few weeks later. But, as far as close games go, Fort Collins was definitely his signature game from this season on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, he had some nice performances, 8 tackles against Legacy, 1 for loss. Boulder, 5 tackles, 1.5 for loss. Fort Collins, once again, 14 total tackles, 7 solo, 7 assisted, and 2 of those going for loss. He had an interception against Smoky Hill as well as Rocky Mountain High School, and pass deflections littered throughout the season en route to Fairview's undefeated season with Jordan Rochelle at the helm. Now let's go ahead and turn our attention to the MVP votes to determine who is our 2024 5A most valuable playmaker. We're going to start with our newest submission here, being Coach Woe, who's going to vote for Austin Madreski here, saying, quote, Madreski was the best player in the state. He's a 4-year starter and is the player who has the keys to the car running the MV offense to an average of 55 points per game. He has great arm strength to make every throw and also the ability to run and keep plays alive with his legs. Best player in the state that I had a chance to watch, end quote. We're going to go up in the ranks of seniority here and go with Phoenix next, who says, quote, Austin Madreski, and it's not even particularly close. I struggled more at spelling his name correctly than who to pick for MVP. He is undoubtedly the best player in Colorado high school football, let alone 5A. Mountain Vista is an offensive powerhouse and, if led correctly, can lead to unimaginable heights. 2,936 yards passing and 50 touchdowns is absolutely insane, and I would be genuinely shocked if they do not win state this year. End quote. Spoiler alert, Phoenix, they do not. I am Cody Stoffer reporting for the future. But thank you for getting that pick in way ahead of time. Now, Gideon here is also going with Austin, saying, quote, I hope that I can see Austin in person again. This is, simply put, one of the greatest careers we have seen in this state's history, along with one of the best single-season campaigns. Yes, this team is good as a whole, but without Austin, what is it? I will put this season up there with Justin Armour in 1990, 2013 McCaffrey, and in the modern era, Blake Purchase in 2022. Great season from a great player to conclude a legendary career, end quote. Now, I guess Gideon should have went after Gino, but it was in the order I was reading it in. But Gino here, who cut behind Gideon, says, Austin Madreski, saying, quote, this one is obviously going to go to the best quarterback in Colorado high school football history. I don't even need to delve into the numbers for people to know what kind of player Madreski is. He might not have gotten that coveted state championship, but he can at least take home this PMC MVP award for the incredible work he has put in for his career. Now, unfortunately for you, the fans, we were here first, Simon and I, only on a technicality of recording and editing episodes before you even had a chance to listen to them. But the fans, you also voted for Austin Madreski as your 2024 5A Most Valuable Playmaker, as he garnered 59% of the vote on 621 votes. Shout out to Rochelle with 16, Andrews with 15, and Basinger with 10% of the votes. But your 2024 5A fan-voted Most Valuable Playmaker of the Year is Austin Madreski out of Mountain Vista High School. Coach V here, not going to change it up, saying this really isn't an argument. Austin has won this award before, but somehow his final season has topped all of the others. It has been a true honor to be able to follow his career from the beginning to the end here in Colorado. Austin and his teammates have set the standard and have shown what football should and can be in Colorado, end quote. And I am going to make this a unanimous selection for Austin Madreski here. And I'm going to do so by talking about some of his career stats and where they stand and look at his growth over the years to his route on becoming the most decorated Colorado high school football player when it comes to the record books. Flashback to freshman year where Mason and I saw him against Arapahoe High School at LPS Stadium, not knowing the player that he would grow to become. As over 11 games played that season, he passed for 1,502 yards on 70% completion and 15 passing touchdowns. Now, he would obviously be handed the full keys to the offense and not disappoint, going for his first 3K season on 224 of 348 passing, 64% completion, 3,327 yards, and 34 passing touchdowns, showing that he can run this offense. Now, his junior year is where he was able to put in the most yards and also became a little bit of a rushing threat, carrying the ball the most times in his career, 47 times for 180 yards and 4 rushing touchdowns, but more specifically over those 12 games played, throwing for 3,675 yards on 70.3% completion percentage and 41 passing touchdowns. Just when you thought this career could not get any more coveted, though, he rushes for 4 touchdowns his senior year that pales in comparison to his 57 total passing touchdowns over the course of the postseason and his 3,470 yards and 7 yards, making for his career totals being 69.3% completion, nice, for 11,911 yards, 147 passing touchdowns to just 36 interceptions on an absurd ratio and an overall QBR of 128.9 to go with his 9 rushing touchdowns and 562 rushing yards and his receiving touchdown that he notched here in his final year. Now let's take a look at the Colorado football record books here to really truly understand where Austin Madreski sits all time in the history of Colorado high school tackle football. I'm going to start with one that I find to be particularly interesting. Austin Madreski has earned the career passing completions record sitting at 814, which is over 50 greater than any other player in Colorado high school football history, and he has done so without even taking the most passing attempts over the course of a career. increasing in importance is his career passing yards, where he now leads by almost 400 yards with 11,911 yards, becoming Colorado's all-time passing yards leader. He is also the career holder for passing touchdowns by 17 total touchdowns. He has become the face of Colorado quarterbacking with 147 passing touchdowns. And finally, he is Colorado's total offense career leader with 12,495 total yards. Give it up, y'all, for Austin Madreski, the greatest Colorado quarterback in Colorado high school tackle football history. And I just want to take a second as well. Y'all might call it glazing, but it really just is honest. Austin is one of the most polite, humble young men I have met. When I met him, it was heading into his sophomore season, and he was very excited and not really sure of the future. And neither were we, honestly, evaluating his throwing motion. We were not sure what the future would hold, and I'm being honest, and I'm making sure that I'm keeping receipts of what we said. But Austin has overcome that and so much more, en route to being just an awesome kid, an awesome young man who's going to grow up and continue his career on the collegiate level, and we could not be more excited or proud of a quarterback to represent, especially are excited that somebody with Austin's stature and seemingly good-mannered nature taking over in these record books over a scumbag who formerly had them, who I'm not going to name. But I am glad to have somebody who represents Colorado off and on the field the way that Austin Madreski does. Austin, once again, we are so excited and so proud of you. And Austin Madreski rakes it in as the 5A 2024 unanimous MVP, Most Valuable Playmaker of the 2024 season. And that will do it for this episode of the Playmakers Corner podcast. Just as a quick rundown here, you had Jared Yanacito be crowned the most valuable coach, the coach of the year for the 2024 5A season. You had Davis Moon narrowly win the newcomer of the year here for the 5A level. You then had the Defensive Playmaker of the Year decided by a tiebreaker from you, the fans, so be sure to keep following us, for Carter Daniels of Mountain Vista High School. Our Offensive Playmaker of the Year went to Fort Collins, a.k.a. Fossil Ridge's very own Nick Kubat, the quarterback there. And our unanimous MVP of the 5A 2024 season was none other than Mountain Vista's and Colorado's very own Austin Madreski. Now, if you're curious on what happened on the other episodes, go ahead and double back anywhere you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or our YouTube channel, Playmakers Corner, on any of those. Subscribe, turn on notifications, follow, whatever that platform has you do, so that way you can check out all of our new episodes. We got our top 5 seniors film breakdown coming out, so we're very excited to be working on that as I speak. We already have some recorded, locked and loaded, ready to go. And we will have tons of more content for you on the flag football route. So please stay tuned for all of that. And be sure to follow along anywhere that you have social media, whether that be at Playmaker Corner on X/Twitter, whether that be Playmakers Corner on Instagram, whether that be Playmakers Corner on TikTok, at least for the time being. We are planning to move that all to YouTube, so make sure that you're still following us there. We're also on Facebook, Playmakers Corner. I have been your host for this episode, wrapping up the 2024 Tackle Colorado football season with this final award show, Cody Stauffer. And on behalf of Phoenix, Gideon, Gino, Coach V, and myself, thank you all for listening. And thank you all, Phoenix, Gideon, Gino, and Coach V, for an incredible season. Shout out to Coach Wout for being our added-on judge for this panel. But those guys, Phoenix, Gino, Gideon, and Coach V, put in incredible work this year. I'm so grateful to be working with such an awesome group of guys, and I hope to see you all around. This is Cody Stauffer signing off for the last time talking about the season. Peace out.